Hey everyone. Hey, I see that John's on. Hey John, and we're about a minute early, so as always, we'll wait until 6:30 to get started. So, uh, yeah, hope everyone's doing well, and people are finding ways to not go too terribly stir crazy. I'm trying to figure out how to, I don't know, I guess how to ride a bike again. I thought I knew how to ride a bike, and then I took it out this weekend, and then I wrecked. So that was a lot of fun. Actually, it was a lot of fun, but so we staying sane. I see Steve's on as well. Hey, Steve, and we just hit the 6:30 mark. Sorry, so that's enough of my random rambling, and let's actually kick this thing off proper. So, welcome again. This is we're in month 3 of our Charlottesville live streams, and we are going to be doing kind of the theme. So, Jeff and I aren't, we promise we're actually not planning to always do like the same flies. We just happen to think alike, and then depending upon the season. We had been on a foam kick for a while, and then last week, Jeff had shown how to tie a top water tarpon pattern that also is really good for bass and other species. And this week, I'm also doing what can be considered a tarpon pattern, although a lot smaller than what you would see for the bigger tarpon. But specifically what we're going to be doing is tying what we call keys style. And what we mean by that, so I'll just grab one. This is, you may recognize this if you look at my channel. You'll see that I have, so on my channel, I have this particular fly that I always highlight. And this is a, I don't know, it's a fun little pink fly, but it is very representative of what it is to tie in a keys style. And what that means is tying towards the back of the hook shank, and specifically tying to try to prevent fouling of material. So you'll hear Jeff and I talk about fouling. He talked about it last week. And what we really mean is where the tail material itself wraps around that hook. And it's still possible to do, as I just showed you on the key style, but it's far less likely. And what causes that is a number of things, right? Could be wind conditions. That has a tendency. So I just saw Jeff's comment about foam for life. And hey, I see John Knox has joined us as well. Hey, John. So, it'll happen when you cast into the wind. If there's strong wind, that might cause the tail material to wrap around. Poor casting with certain types of loops can cause that. The way the fly hits the water, if it hits the water the wrong way, it can cause it. And honestly, even the best fly casters still have the tails foul every once in a while. It's just something that occurs. And so a couple of different fly fishermen have, and fly tyers specifically, have tried to invent ways of reducing the fouling on a hook. And obviously, the key style is, hey, we're just going to tie everything towards the back and have some material to kind of keep that tail pinned back and try to use some stiffer material if we can. Another way that it is done is, this will look very familiar. This is Lefty's Deceiver. And, when Lefty designed this fly, he designed it again. So we'd have stiff bucktail pressing around. And if I kind of deconstruct this fly a little bit, a hackle tail that's pushed off towards the back. And so again, the idea of that is to keep this fly from fouling. And indeed, the deceivers foul a lot less than some other patterns that are out there. And let's see if I have, you'll see some other fly patterns. This is, I don't know who designed this fly. It wasn't me, that I can tell you. what this was designed around is, again, having stiffer materials sticking off the back, less likely to wrap around. And I don't have, and I meant to grab it, and I'm kicking myself, a CK bait fish. And so a CK bait fish is, I think most of us have seen one, and I have a video. It's not a live video. We haven't tied it live. It's one that we probably won't tie live just because it takes so long to do. But it is a fly designed by Chuck Kraft. Like I said, there's one on the channel if you want to take a look at it. And he designed it with the ultra suede tail material, which I do have. If I can find it relatively quickly, I will show it. Probably no one heard that because I wasn't facing the camera. So, here we go. See, everything's in baggies for me. That's how I organize. So this is a tail for a CK bait fish. And so Chuck designed this to help prevent fouling, because when you tie this on the hook, he actually has this material where it folds down and comes back along the tail. And it does that on both sides, actually. And it creates a stiffer section to prevent this tail from wrapping back around. So when you tie it correctly and you have an actual tail, because you'll find tails like these out in some of the some stores, but often they won't have the tabs as long and they'll look a little different. So there's some unsanctioned tails out there, but the actual official ones that kind of came from Chuck's original patterns, they are designed to prevent that fouling. So those are a couple different ways that innovative fly tyers have gone about trying to all have the same result. And so we're gonna tie, like I said, the Keys style tonight. And as you can tell, a fly of this size, that's the perfect size to take out and fish for bass. Over the weekend, unfortunately, our waters were too high. I was fishing this, and this will be the first one that we'll tie tonight. Great coloration, great profile for targeting smallmouth and other predatory species. One of the interesting things too is that even though that this tail is so tall, what happens is that it actually, when it gets wet, folds down. It's one of the reasons why, and we don't talk about this enough. When you tie a fly, you should be tying it in mind of what it's going to look like when it's wet. You may have the prettiest fly in the world when it's dry, but if it gets wet, if it all collapses and doesn't look like anything and just kind of looks like a pile of nothing, then it won't be as enticing for a fish. And so, this, even though it has this giant fat back end, when it gets wet, it actually slims down, but not to where it's pencil, just a line, super thin. It actually looks like a thin minnow going through the water. So that's one of the reasons why I use the thicker tails. So let's talk hooks, right? If we're tying Keys style, you'll notice a lot of these hooks have a shorter shank. And you can tie with anything. So as an example here, this one has a lot more shank sticking out of it. It's something that you can tie with many different types of hooks. And if you don't have one of these shorter shank hooks, tie it on a B10S. That's a great hook. It's so versatile. But if all you have are long hooks, like this 2461, again, just tie it on to the back and just kind of see how it performs differently in the water. But when we, and for what I'll tie tonight, traditionally what we'll see is, so like from Gamakatsu, which is a hook that I can find in my local shops, I use an SC15. Designed for saltwater. It's a little bit more durable. These are flies that I will use for bass, but I will also use it in the saltwater, so I make sure that I tie it on hooks that don't corrode super easily. Or if you really want to get specific, you can tie it on like an ST17. You can notice, let me pull one of these out. So these are actual tarpon hooks. And this is a 2/0 tarpon hook. And look how small it is. But look how thick that wire is. It's so much thicker than, one of these these other hooks, right? And so that thick gauge is meant, you know, obviously for fighting fish that are, you know, 200 pounds, but doesn't need to be a super large hook. So John is asking if this is going to be a sinking fly. Well, it's not it doesn't have foam, much to Jeff's, you know, lament. So it's not going to float. But with that said, it doesn't have any weight added to it. So when we look at these flies, they don't have weight, but they do have, you know, head cement. This one actually has a little bit of UV epoxy on it too. So it will get down, but it'll be just under the surface. So kind of a subsurface fly. It'll be in that top, you know, 1 to 1 foot profile typically. If you fish it slower, then you can get it deeper. And in fact, I was swinging this fly over the weekend because the waters were so much higher, you know, and getting it down towards the bottom. If you want to add weight, you can, John. And, you know, you certainly, when you have this much extra hook shank, because of how you tie it, you can add as much weight as you want to it and really get it where it can sink down. If you want to add some dumbbell eyes, you can as well. In fact, there are some keys style flies that are tied with bead chain or dumbbell eye to get the fly to get under the surface a little bit faster. So let's grab a hook and actually, you know, get into it. These are pretty quick to tie. That's one of the beauties about them as well. Again, it's kind of a guide style fly. So I'm gonna take a hook as always. Debar before it goes in the vise. I'm a broken record on that. So, all right, so let's go ahead, pop it in the vise. And all right, for my thread, I'm going with stronger thread. This is 210, and I'm going with black again because I'm kind of doing this pink and black coloration. Jeff talked about that being, you know, something that's pretty effective for him, and especially for certain types of fish. I happen to agree. Pink, I think, is one of the least appreciated colors in fly fishing. And it's always worked well for me. It's something I've never shied away from using. So if you notice here, I've tied way in the back. I have, you know, typically, you know, and you've always will notice me, I lay it on a thread base, I start up by the eye and I go all the way back. When I'm tying key style, I am tying near the bend of the hook, not tying past the bend, right? So I started close to where the hook point was and just kind of worked my way back to near where that barb was, making sure I'm not going back where that hook actually starts to curve. And then I kind of bring my thread about halfway up. And so that's all the thread that I've put on. So not a ton, not a large base. And so now it's time for some feather. So I have a really nice package of feathers here. Just because I tie so many streamers is something that I really enjoy. And so, you know, as a treat to myself, I've invested. But you can tie this with whatever feather you want. By the way, you can also tie this with other types of material as well. So you don't have to use a hackle feather. You know, if you want to put a rabbit strip off the back of this, you'll see a lot of keys style tarpon flies are tied with rabbit off the back. Again, it's one of the reasons why they started tying in this way was because rabbit or zonker strips are notorious for wrapping around the hook, and there are lots of different techniques that people do to try to prevent it. One of the other ones, you know, because that's kind of the point of tonight is, hey, let's show you how to tie this fly, but also to learn about ways that people try to get material from fouling. So Jeff is asking if he could use a synthetic material. Yeah, of course. You know, this is, again, if you want to, remember the last time I tied, I was tying with faux bucktail. You could use that as well. I mean, the idea is just having a profile shape off the back that's going to mimic some type of small bait fish. So if I had a zonker strip off the back, and I don't have one that close, what you'll see people do is they'll actually tie in a piece of mono like this. And by doing that, then you'll attach the zonker to either with glue, or some people actually have it where they'll thread this through the middle of the zonker, and it'll help pin it back as well. So that's another tip that you guys can do. If you want to see a fly like that, and if you want to see a zonker tail and see flies designed that way, just leave us a comment, let us know. We can tie that one evening for you. All right, so let's go into my flies, or my feather. And so I like to actually grab these short but fat feathers, because like I said, when they get wet, they taper down, but they don't get too tapered, so they still have some volume to them. And that's kind of why I like them for this fly, because there's not much to it. There's not much to this fly, so I need something that doesn't completely go away when it gets wet. If I if I have a thinner hackle feather, kind of like we think about like a dry fly feather, or even woolly bugger hackle feather, sometimes when they get wet, they just all the barbs go right down next to the stem, or the quills go right down next to the stem or the barb, and it really does not look great in the water. So I've got two feathers. Sorry, I should be showing you guys this. Two feathers here. You have a different option, and I tie both ways. So we can do it where the feathers curve away from one another and tie that on. That'll give a little bit, every time that we pause the fly, the feathers will kick out. It gives a little bit of extra action. Or you can tie where the two feathers are together. Makes it nice and flat. And so it leaves it more streamlined, and when you stop, you don't get that kicking action. That, by the way, is how I have tied these. You notice that the material is straight together, and so because I actually have two of these in that kind of straight tail, I'm going to tie this one where the feathers kick out, just to have that extra action and have something a little different. Even though it's the same coloration, it'll have a slightly different action, and that's something that's worth doing too, in my opinion. Hey, if you're going to tie a bunch of different patterns, having some with varying action is good, because it might be what the fish want that day. That fish might want that slight kick, and in other days they may not want that. That may scare them away. They may be a little bit more skittish. So I've got my feathers where they're kicking out apart from one another. I'm going to go ahead, as you notice, I kind of separated out my material a little bit, kind of stick it down over top my hook. Very similar to how Jeff tied the half and half tail, right? Where we just have it on top of our hook shank. And I'm going to grab the feathers with my left hand, and that frees up that point that I kind of separated out for me to put a couple wraps around. And I'm going to do two loose wraps, come around with a third and put a little bit of tension on. I'm working my way back this way, fourth, fifth wrap, right? Not a ton of wraps, but enough that allows me to check to see whether or not these are straight on the hook, and they are. I'm not worried about whether or not they're on both sides of the hook shank, right? You can see here that the feathers are together on this side. We can see here on this side that I've got hook shank showing. I'm actually not worried about that. You can't tell when you finish this fly with the Marabou. It completely covers it. So I'm not going to draw myself crazy by trying to have this on both sides of the hook shank. I'm much more concerned with whether or not that they are straight than whether or not that they are perfect on both sides. So after I've done that, I'm going to grab the kind of front end of our feathers, and I'm going to bring my scissors in. And anytime I have a bulky material like this, when I go to cut, I'll pull up at an angle and lay my scissors at an angle, right? So you see how this is at an angle. My scissors are at an angle. And when you do that, and I'll need to do it twice, see how that is a little ramp? And what that allows me to do is when I come forward to clean this up, it's going to allow everything to taper down very nicely. And I don't get a big bump, and I don't have to build up a ton of thread to trap all this material. So I'm going to go ahead and just start working my way back. Now, you want to be careful because we're tying obviously so close to the back of this hook, and you know, the way that these hooks are shaped. You want to be really careful because if I start tying, I'll do it on purpose, too far back, notice how my tail now is kicking down. I don't know. There, I'll just do it like that. It's kicking down instead of, let me back off those thread wraps. Now it's straighter. So you want to be careful because if you tie too far back, you'll have a tail that droops. And it just won't look as good. I'm not sure whether or not the fish care that much, but I know it doesn't look as good. Sometimes it'll spin in the water and, you know, it won't dart. And, you know, really I want like a darting bait fish when I fish this, right? I want something that's going to kind of jerk through the water, make it look like a small fish is trying to flee away and trigger that instinct to go and chase it. All right, so the next thing that I want to do, and there's really only 3 materials on this fly, is put on some flash. So I'm doing this like dark black crystal flash. I'm not even sure how flashy it is. I just like it. But again, you can use any flash color that you want, any flash type that you want. You know, I like the crinkle flash because it has more structural strength. The way that this flash is designed is that it's actually designed with kinks in it. It keeps it straighter off the back. But, you know, really any flash will work. And we're not doing a ton of them. I'm only doing 3 strands. I'll show you here in just a second after I cut it. Right, just 3 strands. So, you know, this is really a pretty minimal fly. Not a ton of materials that we put on it. So we're gonna kind of keep with what Jeff did the other week, where we're gonna tie. You notice I've tied a little bit farther up front, not all the way to the front of where my thread is, but just behind, and we're just kind of looping it over, and then we can kind of make sure if everything is even. This is even enough, and then we're gonna take. Of course, I let go to show you guys, and that is hard to do. And get it back. We're going to grab with both sides. So you can see I have some in this part of my hand, some in this part of my hand. And it allows me, again, every time I try to show you guys on camera, it messes me up. But what it's going to allow me to do is, as I tie back, to keep on both sides of the hook shank. And again, I don't have to put on a ton of thread wraps to make this work. And I just need to readjust that one. Now's the time to do it. There we go. These are longer than they need to be, so I'm just going to grab these together. I'm going to cut them just behind the tail, so they're a little bit longer. So now when everything comes back, when it gets wet, I'll have my tail material finish here, and then I'll have my flash just off the back. All right, so the last thing that we need to do for this fly, and I'm going to bring my thread close to, let's grab my bodkin so you can see. So I'm not bringing my thread back all the way to where the feather starts. I'm just in front of it. Because again, I'm trying to avoid tying too far back on these hooks because it's real easy for all the material to want to slide back when you tie. Is we want to put Marabou on, and I'm going to be using some black Marabou. This specifically is known as woolly bugger Marabou. So I want to pause for just a minute and kind of show some difference between the types of Marabou that you will find in a fly shop or online. So this is woolly bugger Marabou. This has a thick stem coming all the way up with relatively short pieces of Marabou coming off all the way down the sides. It's a very stiff piece. It's what I'll be using for this fly. However, if you notice that because of the way that stem goes all the way down and because of the way this material comes off of it, it's not something that I can just stick and it's going to wrap all the way around. We're going to have to do something special to make that Marabou behave the way we want to and to get it where we can have nice coverage on the fly. So it's a little bit more tricky to work with. However, there are other types of Marabou out there. So again, organization, right? All my Marabou is in one Ziploc bag. So if I know, hey, I have a pattern that needs Marabou, let me just grab that Ziploc. And so let me pull a couple different types out. So that's regular. And let me find that one. Should have had this already. This is the part where you say, why aren't you prepared? Oh. And then we'll grab that one. Oh, and that's a fun one too. We might tie that on the next fly actually, for fun. So you might see something called X Select. So this is X Select Marabou. So X Select is much longer in general, as far as the way that the material comes off of it. So here we have where the stem kind of ends about here, and we have all of this extra material. So I can actually take this and work all the fibers back, and I have this kind of tail here. This works really well for, what's funny is that if I'm tying a woolly bugger, I actually prefer this type of Marabou to the woolly bugger Marabou. I don't like woolly bugger Marabou for woolly buggers, just because you notice the difference here. If I really bring that material back, it stays vertical because of the way that it's stiff, versus this material, if I bring it back, is a little bit more rounded. And that's, so that's the X Select. Now, you'll also find another type out there. You'll see two other labels. By the way, I seriously do not like tying with Marabou because it gets everywhere. If you thought deer hair got everywhere, just play with some Marabou. Okay, so this is just strung Marabou, right? So this is just says strung Marabou, and this is going to look similar to the X Select that we just looked at, only it won't be as long. So here's a full quill of the strung Marabou, but like the X Select, we can see it has these longer, more flowy pieces that we tie with. And again, this is also really nice to use for woolly buggers, right? So I would just tie right on the tail end like that. Yeah, Jeff saying Marabou will float around for days. Yes, it will. And you will find it in places in your tying bench that you're like, why is that there? It literally flows everywhere. It's one of the reasons why we put up with Marabou though, because look at how even this piece that isn't super flowy, the woolly bugger Marabou is like the least flowy in general. If you just breathe on it, it just moves. One of the reasons why Marabou is so effective is because when these flies just sit in the water, this material is breathing. It's moving. It makes that fly look alive without you putting any effort into it. It's one of the reasons why the woolly bugger is one of the most effective fly patterns ever invented, is simply because it uses a bunch of Marabou for the tail, and it literally just sits in the water and just breathes. So this last one is this is what's known as blood quill Marabou. So you may see that advertised as well. What's interesting about blood quill Marabou, there's a tongue twister, is it looks an awful lot like your X Select. And it kind of, this particular piece is in between the length of the strung Marabou and the X Select. So the way I kind of look at it is it's really that in between. Of all the Marabou, this is probably my favorite type for kind of everything. Again, look how flowy that is. It just moves, just breathes. So it's really, really fantastic type. A little bit harder to find sometimes. It's just something to kind of keep your eye on. So hopefully that helps kind of demystify when you see, well, what is this versus this within Marabou, why I thought Marabou was just Marabou. It just comes down to the way the feather is. But again, for this fly, we're going to be using this woolly bugger Marabou, just because I actually happen to like it for this type of fly. But I never tie with this where I just put it on and tie it in. I'm actually going to go ahead and start stripping the material off the, I guess the stem of the feather. I might have that wrong. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take this end, which is kind of gnarly and not great, and we're just going to get rid of it. I just break that off because I'm after these longer fibers going towards the back. And there's actually a good bit of usable material on this Marabou feather coming all the way to back here. So I'll actually take and remove this back section too, just so that it doesn't get in my way. I'll just strip all that material off. And so all of this is ready, and I can actually tie a few flies out of this if I want to. Now, if you are going to do this type of technique with Marabou, I highly recommend that you start from the back of the feather, the thicker part of the stem, and work your way forward. And the reason for that is you notice all of these fibers are kind of bending forward. So it allows you to come in and easily separate and pull back and not have to worry about having a bunch of material trapped. And so what I'm trying to do is grab, I don't know, maybe an inch of Marabou, and I'm just going to pull back and strip it right off the stem. Now don't let go of this or it will fly off your bench and be really annoying to clean. So once you have this, you want to be really careful, and you want to, I transfer over to my other hand, and I'll actually come in because you can see I still have some of the stem, and I'll actually grab that. Be careful in such a way that I kind of collapse that bundle down to where it's usable for tying. And so now what I'll do, now that I have it, I'm actually going to bring it back, and I'm looking at the length. And I like it to come maybe about halfway back, that tail. And I kind of get that lined up, and then I'll bring in my left hand again, and I'll kind of pinch it in place, and I'll put 1 wrap, 2 wraps, 3 wraps with my tension, and now I know that material is trapped and I can actually let go. So at this point, I'll take this big clump in the front. Let me make sure that you guys can actually see what I'm doing. I'm grabbing this piece here, right? This is that front end, and I'm coming in and I'm cutting at an angle with my scissors. I'll try to show this on the camera by tilting. You see how now it's that ramp at an angle? That's going to allow me, when I tie forward, remember I showed that before, to have a cleaner head. And since so much of this fly is exposed on the front end and we want to have that tapered head, it's actually rather important to make sure if you're looking for that cleaner look. So it's important to remember here, there's not a ton of wraps around the materials locked in place, but it's only 3 wraps holding it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flip this around so you can see me do this on the other side as well. But I'm going to do the same thing that I just did. Now, one of the nice things is that I actually know the exact amount of material that I grabbed off of this side because obviously it's missing. So I will work both sides of one feather to make sure that I have an even amount of material on both sides of my fly. So I'll do the same thing. Kind of grab this material, start kind of collapsing it down. When I have it collapsed, I'll line it up. I'm looking at both sides of my fly to make sure that my material is about the same length. And once I have it where I want it, I'll kind of pinch it in place. And we'll do 1 wrap, 2 wrap, very light, no tension, 3 wraps, pulling up so we don't spin it. And now our material is locked in where we want it, so it's not going to easily come off. And I'm going to grab, cut at an angle, that excess material sticking off the front. Okay, so the last thing that you could do, and I will for this fly, is I'll put a little bit of Marabou right on top as well. And so for that, we'll just grab just a small amount, not a bunch, off of our Marabou feather. And same thing as before, just kind of put it down on top, put it in place, tie it in. There's 3 wraps. Grab our excess, be really careful not to cut any of the tail material. And there we go. And so now I've got pretty good coverage around my hackle feather. As it collapses, it'll become more and more solid. But I don't put a ton of Marabou here. You can experiment. You can put as much as you want. And, you know, let me know how it goes. Send us pictures. So now all I'm going to do is start moving my thread forward and back to clean up the front of this fly and really capture in all of that Marabou. And you notice how easy that was for me to do, and how I have this nice clean head. And that 100% was due to the fact that I cut all of that Marabou off at an angle, and it allows it all to flatten down. And so that's all there really is to this fly. You know, the debate around whether or not eyes are required for a fly will always exist. I like putting eyes on my flies. I think they look really nice. Are they required? I honestly will say for certain species of fish, I think they are. I think for like hickory shad, they really love targeting the eyes. I've had lures when I fish conventional where, you know, I hooked into a mess of hickory shad, and the back of the metal jig that I was using was fine, but the front, all the paint had been stripped off, the eyes had been sucked off because they were hitting that front of that fly first. And then you'll have something like a bluefish come along and your nice tail's gone because they aim for the tail of the fly. And how do they know what's the tail versus the head? Well, they'll probably look at the orientation, the way it's swimming. But, you know, again, I think it's something that for certain species of fish can be important. In general, though, no, I don't think that it's required for every fish. But we'll put eyes on this for fun. And to do that, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to flatten my material. And I'm going to do it before I cut my thread off. So again, debarb pliers. I think you guys have seen me do this a few times now on the live stream for those of you who've joined me in the past. And all I'm doing is I'm kind of flattening down this thread. So you can see it's a little bit, it's hard to see on camera, but it's just giving me a base position to put on the eyes. I do it before I finish my thread off, just in case any of this material looks like it's loosening up, which sometimes can happen because you're messing with that thread. And then I'll be able to go back and lock it in. But nothing moved, everything looks solid, everything looks good. So I'll go ahead and I'll whip finish. We'll do a 4 turn. Pull that nice and tight and cut it off. All right. So we need to put some eyes on this fly. We got a couple different options on this fly here. I did a nice dragon eye. That was a lot of fun. This is a 3mm eye. Let's find something different for tonight. Again, Ziploc bags. These are all of my unweighted eyes. So, you know, nothing with dumbbells or anything like that. I know that 2 or 3mm is what I'm looking for. And so I will go through here. And I'm looking for a sticker eye this time versus one that has a, where it, like those dragon eyes I showed you, they actually stick out a bit. And so I want a sticker eye because I want it to lay a little bit flatter. This will be a little bit of a different movement. It'll leave a little bit of a different pulse in the water. This might be the eyes. I want to use, nope, there it is. Cool. So we are going to use stick-on eyes 1/8 of an inch. If you want to use standard instead of metric. So let's pull it out. And see if I can put this on without a bodkin. Nope, that is way too small. So with a bodkin, well, we're gonna get a new one. Anyone who's ever messed with eyes before will 100% sympathize with that. So we're just putting it onto the end of the bodkin. Allows me to put it into place and stick it in. And once it is somewhat attached, then you can come back and manipulate that eye as needed and get it roughly into the position and shape that you want. So super reflective, reflecting my my studio lights back nice and bright so you can barely see it. I'll show you how I actually get it off of this package too. So I'm actually going to come in. Oh, this is going to be hard to do on camera. And just getting the bodkin in between the back and the sticker. And that's how I pull it off. So let me flip it around. Concentrate and place it on. And I can adjust now if I need to. Although that looks pretty good. So once you get it into place, obviously they're not going to stay in position, so now you need to lock them into place. And this is where UV can come in handy. So if you're doing, like these dragon eyes that have a little bit more thickness, yeah, that won't show up on camera, a little bit more thickness to them, then I suggest putting on a UV epoxy because that will fill in that gap. But for the sticker eyes that lay so flat, that's really not a problem. So I'm just going to put on some head cement and just kind of coat it on there and give it a second to start drying, and then I'll be able to move on to the next fly. And actually, I have a trick on my bench for getting these two. So what I'm doing is, you can just barely see, I have enough in there to fill that top gap. And I'll do the same on the bottom. So where I'm making sure some of this head cement is getting into that gap with the sticker eye, so that it as it dries, it adheres in there and locks that eye in as a part of the entire head of the fly. And so now that I've done the top and the bottom, I'll very, very carefully try not to knock the eyes out of position, go through and fill in the rest of it along the sides of the head of the fly. And I'll do the same on the other side. All right. My little guy is upset at something upstairs. I don't know if you guys hear that or not. But, okay, and so that's it. So now we have, just cleaning off the bodkin so that that stuff doesn't stay on it. We have a finished fly. You know, it just needs to dry. And so what I actually have is my bobbin holder. I will actually use that as a little fly drying rack. And I want to invert this fly when it dries so that the excess material, if it's going to run, will run down versus running back into my marabou and the tail of my fly. So I'll leave it like that. And then I'll be able to move on to the next fly and that'll dry perfectly fine just like that. I do that for most of my streamers where I'm finishing off the head, especially with head cement. Okay, so we're going to tie this next one a lot faster. I wanted you to see that technique. I wanted you to kind of explain why we tie certain ways and give you kind of an overview of Marabou so that you guys kind of know what's the difference, what types are out there. So this time we're going to tie a orange and chartreuse. So I'm grabbing some chartreuse hackle, some orange and chartreuse, because that is another great coloration. It's one of my favorite colors, especially for bass. So same hook, great hook size, versatile, something I can take with me saltwater and into the local rivers here in the Charlottesville area, as well as going out to my lakes for bass. All right, got my hook on. I'm going to use orange thread. And same thing, starting up by that hook point, work my way back. Again, you'll see that this fly takes a lot less time than that first one, just because I was explaining along. So I've got my thread in place, bring it up about halfway forward. And let's go ahead and grab some hackle. Same thing, I'm kind of looking for those shorter but nice and fat feathers, because they will really look like a nice short fat minnow when it gets wet. You know, if you're not familiar enough with how material looks when it gets wet, tie it up, take it down, or take it into a bathtub or your sink if you have to, and just kind of pull it through and see what it does, see what it looks like. Bathtubs are great because you can actually you can strip it, a foot or two. And if it's not looking right, then don't bother with that. Cut the material off and try differently. Or you might notice, oh wow, that one material looks so different when it's wet. Maybe I'll do it in a slightly different way. And it's how I know that to tie with these bigger, thicker, wider hackle fibers for my my minnows. So same thing, 2, 3, I'll do 4. Kind of wrap this back a little bit too. I really want this to be locked down in case any small little bluegills or something come up and try to short strike it. Some other little fish, cut it off at an angle. Cut the rest of it off and wrap forward. So I've noticed that my hackle fibers are a little bit slanted, right? They're not perfectly in line with that plane of the hook. So they're at an angle. So I want to correct that. So, oh, see you, Steve. Sorry, I just saw that you had to sign off. But I'm glad you enjoyed it. And let us send us a picture if you try it. So I'm going to show you how you can straighten feathers. I haven't put too many wraps on, so I can get it to where they become straight. Again, D-bar pliers are so incredibly useful. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of grab back, and I'm going to twist. And what that does, see, it's very close, is it starts spinning all of that thread around that hook shank. There we go. To where it becomes straight. So if it ever starts looking a little bit slanted on you, that's one way, as long as you haven't put down a ton of thread, that's one way that you can actually straighten that fly back out. Okay. So we've got our tail material on. Now I want to go ahead and tie in my flash. I'm going to use some olive flash, but it's just chartreuse. So I'm going to grab this out. I want this one to be a little bit flashier, so I'm going to grab 4 strands. and then I'm going to fold it in half and cut it. So it's going to end up where there's like 8 strands on each side. I don't know why. Just feel like this one needs to be flashier. Let's see here. Will there be enough flash? It'll be close. We'll find out. Yeah, we're gonna leave it with 4. So you see what I was doing there? I know that I need to fold my material in half, my flash. And so I'm actually looking at the length of my flash, and I notice it's just not long enough for me to be able to have folded it in half, cut it, and then fold it in half again. So we are going to leave it as it is. And just do the 4. So again, bring them down on top, separate them out, turn the flash, and lock it in place. Grab our flash and bring it back behind the fly. Cut it. And now we are ready for our marabou. So for this one, I found in my little bag of marabou this really cool grizzly hot orange marabou. So that's what we're going to use. It's a little bit different than our last type. This is not quite the same type of marabou that we were dealing with. Not the stem isn't quite as thick. So we're actually going to, and it's much shorter. So we're actually going to use 2 of these. So we're just going to use the tips. So we're going to tie this in a little bit closer to what you might be familiar with a woolly bugger. So rather than stripping off like we did last time, we're just going to kind of lay it in place. And I'm going to do loose wraps and pull upwards. Put about 3 wraps in, pull it back, cut it off at an angle. Make sure I cut all of it. Got a little bit more down here. I'm going to cut off as well. And we'll grab one more and we'll put it on to the other side of the fly. With this stuff, there's a dull side and a shiny side, although they're pretty close. So I'm trying to make sure that the shiny side is out. So we'll get it in place. That looks pretty good. Grab it. 1, 2. Started getting away from me. 3. Cool. So we'll cut that out of the way too. Flip that back around. Start to clean it up. Now, because I used the actual main stem and I didn't pull just the, I guess the quills off, there's going to be a lot more bulk to clean up for the head of this fly. And so making sure that you cut this off at an angle becomes that much more important, or it'll be very, very noticeable. And again, we want this to be kind of the head of our fly. So we're gonna, what I'm basically doing is just working my thread back and forth, really trying to even out the head of this. So I get a kind of a nice cone finish. And trying to make sure that it's even all the way down. Okay, that's looking pretty close. So I think I'm ready to flatten out. Grab the old D-barbs, flatten my thread a bit, getting ready for those sticker eyes. I'm gonna use the same eyes that I did last time. I like those, I think they're pretty good, but I'm gonna do one modification for fun. So I got a nice flat spot that I've worked into my thread. Cut my thread, tied on just in case, but everything's looking really good. So I'll grab that whip finisher and finish off this fly. 2, 3, 4 turn. Pull that nice and tight. Cut it off. All right, so we're gonna do the same sticker eyes, only this time we're gonna make them angry. So what do I mean by that? Well, I gotta see what I'm doing, so I'm gonna do it first and then I'll show you. So, what I did for the eye is I cut it at a slant. And what that does is just, I don't know, it makes it look squinty. And it's kind of like, where's it going? I don't know. That's what it looks like to me. And I call it an angry, well, actually, I don't call it an angry fly. A friend of mine looked at the flies tied with these style of eyes and says, oh, that fly looks angry. And the name kind of stuck. So when I do this, I need to put it in, maintaining that angle. That is not going to show up well on camera. We'll see. I'll finish it off and then I'll pull it up closer so you guys can see what this looks like. So that's one eye, and let me just go ahead and cut the other and put the other on real quick. And I'll show you what it looks like. Oh, we might be, oh, I'm in luck. I'm dropping eyes today, something terrible. Haha. Rescued. Okay, there we go. They are. One needs to be turned ever so slightly. Cool. All right, so now last bit is just putting on the head cement. Notice how I'm grabbing this Marabou and getting it out of the way. I don't want to mess with the character of that Marabou by accidentally putting a bunch of head cement on it. So I'm going to try to avoid that as best as I can as I work this this head cement around my fly. And so I just, if it's in the way, I just grab it and move it out of the way. All right, so let me put some down the bottom of this fly, do the same thing, kind of grab that Marabou, get it out of the way so I can cover all the thread wraps on the head of this fly. Really make sure I get good coverage so that these stickers are kind of locked into place. They're not likely to pop off when I'm fishing them, especially if, you know, I catch a fish with it. Which this is definitely going to be fished because this is a fun color. It's a fun pattern. Super wind resistant fly. Not one. That might not be the right way to say. It's a fly that you can cast on a very lightweight rod. It's not going to get hung up in the wind. That's another reason why they'll tie flies like this down the Florida Keys, because they get wicked winds down there. You get the convergence of two big water bodies kind of coming together with a strip of land above it. So they get some crazy weather down there. And so, you know, when the wind's blowing, the fishing doesn't necessarily stop. All right, so let's go ahead and spin this a little bit, and then I'll show you what I meant by those eyes. Oh, that's not going to focus. Will it? There it is. So you can just barely see that. The reflections are so intense. I can post a picture on Facebook too, although I know a lot of us aren't on it. But it just makes that eye slanted. And oh, there's another example. So this was tied the same way. So you can see that eye. It has that slant to it. It's a really cool effect. Absolutely zero care by the fish whether or not you've cut your eye slanted. This is 100% to catch the fisherman. It's just something I think looks cool. It's neat in the box. And that's all there is to that one. The fish are not going to notice. That one I can pretty much guarantee. So that's it. So, we see two different variations. We have our kind of pink and black Marabou fly, and then we have our, I don't know what I'm gonna call this. I'm gonna call this my orange rocker style Keys fly. All right, it's got like a little mohawk. Of course, all that's gonna flatten down once it gets wet. But a nice, fire tiger-like pattern. You can see the difference. We tied this one with the hackle feathers together, so they are not branching out, versus our pink and black fly. We tied it with the tails with the curvature opposite, so as this gets wet, it will have that extra movement as well. So, two different ways that you can tie your flies. Fly pattern that's very easy to tie, very easy to cast and fish, as well as a fly that does not get wrapped around itself, doesn't foul very easily. So, a pattern that's really good, obviously, to use in the saltwater. It was designed for saltwater. It can be used up here in Virginia. It doesn't have to be used in the Florida Keys. Very effective pattern. Very good small minnow, small bait fish imitation. Something that works really well in our local rivers, works really well in our ponds. Something that you can fish. This is very lightweight. So it will sink, but it'll sink very slowly. So it's a fly that you can fish like a suspended fly. So as it sinks, you can twitch it and it'll sink real slow. That can be very seductive. Or a fly that if you want to, and I know John was asking about this earlier, you can put in a little bit of weight into it. And, just don't put a ton, because obviously, there's just not a lot of room in the way that this is tied, but you put a little bit of weight into it and get it to sink more. Or you could just put in a set of bead chain eyes. Bead chain would be all you would need for this fly to get it to drop, because there's just not a lot of material to slow that fly down once it hits the water. Well, I hope you guys learned something. A little bit of a different fly for us than some of the other ones that we've tied. Hopefully you see that, you don't have to, if you're fishing for smallmouth or you're fishing for largemouth, you don't necessarily have to look for a fly that's just says smallmouth or largemouth fly. You can branch out, and you can definitely 100% use freshwater flies in saltwater and saltwater flies in freshwater, and you'll have success in both. Some of the best flies, Clouser minnow, it's a great example. Clouser minnow might be the most successful artificial lure pattern of any type that I've ever heard of. And that includes conventional tackle, right? That's just an artificial lure in general. Something more than 160 different patterns, all taken from the same fly. So, kind of think outside the box. If a pattern looks good and it's worked really well for you in freshwater, try it in salt and see what happens. So Jeff put out a good reminder to everyone. Next week, we will have a very different format. We're not going to be tying a fly. We're going to have 4 people on. We'll have myself. We'll have Jeff on, and we will have 2 others. We will have Andy Slauson from Mossy Creek Fly Fishing. He will be joining us again. And if you remember him from the other week when he tied up a musky pattern. We will also have someone new for us. This will be Matt Riley. Matt is a guide in Southern Virginia. He is a phenomenal guide. If you don't follow him on Instagram, you might want to check him out, because he's always showing his clients on big fish, whether it be trout, big rainbows or browns. He'll go and knows how to find some nice brook trout up in our waters, up in the mountains. Beautiful smallmouth, beautiful musky. He kind of does it all. And so we're very lucky to get some of his time, so you guys can ask a guide questions as well. And the questions, some of you are on our email list for Charlottesville Project Healing Water, so you can, email me the questions in if you want. If you want, leave them as a comment. For those of you who may not be on the email list, leave them as a comment on this video, and we'll capture them and make sure that we answer them next week. We will also have the live chat available, so you can submit a question that way as well. But I know a couple of you that watch may not have an account, so we want to make sure that you know that there are other ways to get your questions over to us. We have a Facebook page as well, Charlottesville Project Healing Waters. So if you have Facebook account but you don't have a YouTube account and you're not on our email list, you can give us a question there as well. So want to make sure that your questions are heard. And they can be anything fly fishing related. If you want to know about gear, if you want to know about leaders, if you want to know about flies, kind of the sky's the limit. If you want to ask about, from a guide perspective, certain types of things about targeting certain types of fish, we will have obviously a guide on. Jeff is a phenomenal resource. He may be humble about it, but he's a phenomenal resource for fly fishing from a kayak. He was on at one point he was on a pro team for a major kayak brand. So if you have questions about kayak fishing in the Virginia waters, he's a great resource, and feel free to ask questions there. So really, the sky's the limit. And if we don't know the answer, we'll make it up and make it sound like we know what we're talking about. So with that, everyone have a good night, and we will see you next week at the same time, 6:30 on a Tuesday. So take care.